What's up, y'all? Good morning. I'm just leaving my house, and the topic I want to talk about as I take a little stroll is further actually about Sultan Qaboos, little wildlife in Oman. In 1970, when the Sultan came to power, he also abolished slavery in Oman. This is significant because, well, in a lot of ways. Number one, it was one of the last countries to officially end slavery, and I think we have to acknowledge that it's only been officially abolished around the world. Second, it makes him one of the great emancipators in history. Just if you consider the number of slaves who were freed by his decree. Now, at the time, a third level or layer of the significance, just letting y'all say hi to my little friends, is Oman was actually an empire at the time that was based on slavery. So in ancient history, Oman was the land of frankincense. People familiar with the Bible may know about the three wise men, the Magi, bringing frankincense to baby Jesus. So this was a kind of resin that people would use in different religious ceremonies, and it only really grows in Oman. It's like a sap. It's still here today. You can get it everywhere. You burn it. It's very sweet. It gets rid of mosquitoes. It kind of cleans the air. Very fragrant. So after that, this same area of the world had other metals and minerals, and they of course would be importing slaves from all over the world. But if you look at its location, that would be primarily India and Africa, as well as slaves of its Arab slaves or people of other Semitic ethnicities that live in this area. There are some non-Arab Semitic minorities around Arabia, especially Oman and Yemen. So anyways, people of all ethnicities would be kind of, put to work, so to speak, as well as willing workers, paid workers, in extracting these minerals. But eventually that ran out. Now, what would you do? Quite simply, to keep an income going, you make your money off the slaves themselves. Instead of bringing the slaves to help an industry, the slaves became the industry. And Oman annexed part of East Africa in order to concentrate on an African slave trade, whereas previously the main source of slaves had been from the north, and that's the Caucasus regions, Eastern Europe, Central Asia. But that route was cut off for Arab purposes by Ottomans, the Ottoman Turks. So the focus then became on enslaving people from India and Africa, and eventually it became Africa. So to think that someone who was the sultan and ruler of a slave-based empire would, in one stroke of a pen, basically abolish slavery, I mean, that's huge, that's significant. And, it's just something that, well, it's a meritorious act in Islam. It's well known that many of the early Muslims would make money just so they could free slaves. There was a scholar who was once criticized. He was told, look, the people are keeping too many slaves. How come you're not saying anything about it? And he said, just wait. A few weeks went by, and then finally he said, Assalamu alaikum. He stood on the pulpit and basically started telling people, you need to free slaves. It's a meritorious act and this sort of thing. And then the person who originally approached him said, why? Why did you wait so long? He said, well, I needed to get enough money so that I could purchase the freedom of a slave, and therefore I would be practicing what I preached before I preached it. You see what I mean? Abu Bakr was someone who spent his money to free slaves, especially those who had converted to Islam but were being dominated by the Quraysh. And even Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself was known, I think he had at least 50 slaves that he had freed. And so this is basically something that it's an Islamic practice that needs to be revived, because slavery is rife and rampant in this world. China right now is enslaving en masse Uyghur Muslims and other Turkic Muslims living in the Western province by forcing them to work for no wage, or even if there is a wage, they're being forced to work in factories to continue basically to boost industrial production. They're being kidnapped and forced to leave their ethnicity, leave their language, leave their religion, and more importantly, they're being enslaved. They're being forced to work. Whether they're getting paid or not, this isn't work that they're choosing to do. They don't have a choice about leaving. They have no rights as workers. There are people being kidnapped and sold into slavery around the world. There are people being enslaved by debt. Where I come from, the glass country I lived in, Pakistan, has a lot of people who are basically enslaved due to debt, and there's a feudal landlord system in place. So if we look at one of the most modern emancipators of slaves as a model, well, I would just say if we want to look at someone as a role model to deal with modern day slavery, I think we should look at the most modern emancipator of slaves that we know. And that, in fact, is Sultan Qaboos, rahimahullah. All right, y'all. Peace.